Jay Ward, ever heard of him? I thought not. This was a guy who was the creative lead for a Pixar movie coming out in 2006 about cars. Pixar had a problem though. They didn't have a title for said movie. In walks Ward, getting paid $700,000. What title did he come up with? He received a bonus of $300,000. Because $301,000 would have been too far. Cars is a great movie, ignore the critics, and has a very fun plot, ignore the critics. Yeah, apparently these movies aren't good, but nobody told me that when I first watched them, and I made the mistake of liking them. I was shocked when I found out there's people who don't like these movies. Next you're gonna tell me there's people who don't think Real Steel is the greatest movie of all time. It is my full-hearted belief that these movies are way better than people remember. So I've come here to defend this franchise against people who don't think it's good. And I've come to answer any questions people might have about the world of cars. So what's the first question? Okay, I'm stumped. Yeah, a lot of criticism is actually directed at how the movie's world building isn't the best. Some people say the Cars world doesn't make any sense at all. Those people don't know how to have fun. Others point to the fact that the Cars franchise only exists to sell toys, which is a fair enough point, but that doesn't mean the movies are inherently bad. In fact, it might just mean the opposite. Good movies typically lead to an increased amount of toys being bought. Just ask Star Wars or Marvel. They figured out that the movies you release have to actually be good the hard way. Plus, you can make that argument for any other franchise. Toy Story, Monsters Inc. These franchises also only exist to sell toys to children. It's just more prominent in Cars because the merchandising is extreme with this franchise. Like, I'll be the first to admit, there is a stupid amount of Cars merchandise compared to other franchises. Name any number. Okay, there's a Cars toy worth that amount. And for $174.10, not including shipping, you can buy everybody's favorite character, Jerry Recycled Batteries. 3 sold. What kind of person buys this? This is Editing Josh. I got sick right after recording this video, and in the 3 days that it took me to get to editing this, another person bought one. Seriously, 4 people bought this. What kind of person buys this? Probably the same kind of person who would watch this video, so I'm not gonna make any jokes about that. Oh, you want some funny Lightning McQueen Crocs? I hope you don't want food for the next week! I've realized I'm not really helping my case, so let's just go to the first movie. This first movie has the highest score on Rotten Tomatoes, but that's still not saying much. It only has a 74%. It deserves at least an 80%. Some people say this is the only good movie, and the trilogy starts getting bad whenever we get to the second movie of the franchise. And to those people, I want to say, if you hate fun, you can just say so. The first movie has not only the coolest opening scene in any Pixar movie, it also has the best supporting cast of any Pixar movie. This was due to the fact that it takes place primarily in just one small town with only a handful of cars. The town feels very flushed out with colorful characters and big personalities, and obviously, yes, they're side characters, so they're pretty much all one note. But that still makes for fun and entertaining dynamics between the cars, such as with Sarge and the tree hugger. It's fun to see these cars interact. This movie is full of little gem conversations, which I appreciate as somebody who likes getting to know the characters around the story as much as I like getting to know the characters in the story. And speaking of the characters the story actually focuses on, they're all great as well. There's Sally. They somehow managed to make a car look hot. Don't ask me to explain it, I'm not a carologist. She pairs very well with Mater in the overall story of the first Cars movie. You see, Lightning McQueen is an up-and-coming star set to be the first rookie to win the Piston Cup. He is speed, literally. I guess not literally, he's a car, but he's really fast. But when his transporter falls asleep, he gets lost in a small town known as Radiator Springs. He meets the fun cast of characters I was talking about previously, but we really just need to focus on the main 3 characters from Radiator Springs, whom he meets on his journey to get back to his next race. And real quick, Luigi and Guido. I'm not going to talk about Luigi and Guido much because they kind of have absolutely nothing to do with Lightning McQueen's character development, but they are hilarious, and eventually they become McQueen's pit crew. Good for them. Now let's get back to Mater, Sally, and Doc Hudson. Mater and Sally represent 2 sides of the same coin. Sally shows Lightning McQueen the love and community that comes from a small town. McQueen does not just fall in love with Sally, he also falls in love with what she represents. Mater shows Lightning McQueen the rowdy side of the small town. Nothing he does matters, because he's separate from the rest of the world. He's kind of like this Ferris Bueller, Captain Jack Sparrow sort of character, where everything works out for him, and he's just easygoing. He's made to be the sort of character to push other characters in the direction that they should go narratively. And again, narratively speaking, more important than the fact that he likes Mater, he likes what Mater represents. This lifestyle of freedom and genuine love. Two things he doesn't really have at the beginning of the movie. The third major character he meets in Radiator Springs is my favorite character of the entire trilogy, Doc Hudson, aka the guy who would go on to become Lightning McQueen's mentor. All around fantastic character. Doc and McQueen have one of the most realistic mentor/coach relationships I've ever seen in a movie. I think it's also his attitude towards McQueen in this movie that I love so much. He's a very calming presence to balance out the crazy that is McQueen. And it's because he was like Lightning McQueen back in his day, and because he knows exactly what McQueen is dealing with, he doesn't yell at him or anything. He instead tries to calm down McQueen, helping him with his nerves and giving him advice.
If you're going hard enough left, you'll find yourself turning right.
This sentence has been burned into my brain since the age of 7. But this movie has so much charm, and not as much racing as you would think. It's really just the opening scene and the ending scene, and then some practicing on the dirt road in between those. But that's really it as far as racing is concerned. It's more about Lightning McQueen trying to learn to take life slow, take life easy. It's a very simple story, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Although some reviewers would beg to differ. Yeah, a lot of negative reviews come from people who seem to just hate Cars. Not the movie, but like actual cars, or they just have ADHD. I've read nearly 50 reviews for this first Cars movie. Here's a real excerpt from one of the reviewers. Okay, so this guy starts with saying, "I've never seen a Pixar film so void of magic and originality before," and then spends the entire review just complaining about NASCAR. Like, here's a literal excerpt from the closing paragraph. Take the idiocracy of NASCAR, the soulless corporate presence of General Motors, and the obligatory reference to Tex Avery, and you have this vapid concoction. My only question to him is, if he hates cars and NASCAR so much, why do you watch a movie about cars? This critic for The Phoenix said it's a jittery, revved-up nightmare about the rise of the machines. Now I'm just wondering, did we watch the same movie? Like, we did not watch the same movie. And to be fair, some reviews actually have merit to them. Some talk about how the world building of Cars doesn't make any sense, and I can understand that point. But like, some of them go a bit too far. It's immediately odd that an audience of Cars would watch other cars race. Yeah, this movie is unrealistic. Like, cars who can race, watching other cars race? Could you imagine if humans just watched other humans race? As for the interactions themselves, there's a courtroom sequence, complete with a requirement for legal representation, yet no requirement to be an actual lawyer. Garages contain photo albums and trophies with handles, yet tire hands aren't versatile enough to grasp these or the myriad of other items necessary for routine car maintenance. I would hate to watch a movie with this guy. But overall, the vast amount of people don't have a problem with the first Cars movie. Alright, let's talk about Cars 2. I love this movie, I do. I will say, if you think you don't like it, maybe rewatch it, because I actually used to think this was the worst Cars movie, but I rewatched it for this video and I realized something. Despite the fact that Mater is the main character of this movie, he's not actually in it that much. Not as much as the main character probably should. I don't really care for him as much as some other Cars fans do. I think he is overall a little bit more funny than he is annoying, but I mean, he definitely has his moments of both. The plot is really well thought out, and one thing that Cars movies are always fantastic at is introducing new characters. Finn McMissile, Holly Shiftwell, and Francesco are all three amazing additions to the franchise. Finn and Holly especially are very well developed characters. I love these two. I would watch a whole movie with these two. Honestly, it feels at times more like they are the main characters of the movie. This movie, I understand some of the criticism a little bit more because it is so different from the first movie. Lightning McQueen goes through a little bit of a character arc in this movie, but he takes a major backseat to Mater. And I can see why some people would be confused when the second movie doesn't have the same main character as the first movie. Even if overall I still do think the hate is overblown. Take this review from USA Today. It's a confusing diversion from what made Cars work, shifting the focus to Mater, and for some reason, infusing that focus with a spy thriller plot. I agree, it's a weird shift, but in a review, you're supposed to judge the story, not how weird of a shift it is from the first movie. In the review, they don't actually talk about what's bad with the plot. They just say it's different. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse. And in this movie especially, there's way more comments about how the world of Cars just doesn't make sense. Like, oh no, how are the cars gonna get an oil change? This 5-second scene right here, where Miles' Axelrod leaks oil, was apparently a problem for a few critics. Oh no, if they're leaking oil and they also drink oil all the time, aren't they technically drinking their own blood? Or worse, drinking their own pee? Because of this question, the whole trilogy is now unwatchable. Although, as I read through maybe 30 negative reviews for this movie, I have made a conspiracy theory. I'm pretty almost definitely sure the majority of negative reviews on Rotten Tomatoes comes from people who watched only the first half of the movie and then turned it off because of Mater's flaws. Let me explain. To prove my point, let me show you what I'm talking about by reading a review from this second movie. Mater is so unaware of the customs in foreign lands that he doesn't even realize he's unaware. He just assumes everything everywhere must be like it is back home in Radiator Springs. Because why wouldn't it be? The world is whatever is contained inside his tiny little car brain and nothing else. Yeah, that's literally his character flaw in the movie to overcome. Are characters not allowed to have flaws anymore? I mean, that's literally what causes most of the problems in this movie. It's what causes friction between Mater and McQueen. Mater can't grasp that people are laughing at him because of how ridiculous he is until the end of the movie, when he gets kidnapped and has a chance to self-reflect on how he has acted thus far. You can't penalize a movie because the main character has flaws, especially when the movie addresses those flaws. But I still haven't answered the question, why is Mater the main character of Cars 2? And why are there British spies? Well, apparently the idea came from John Lasseter, the director of the first movie. While he was going around the world promoting the first Cars movie, he came up with the plot of the second movie, because any new place that he went to, he would, and I quote, "I kept looking out thinking, what would Mater do in this situation, you know? I could imagine him driving around on the wrong side of the road in the UK, going around in a big, giant traveling circles in Paris, dealing with the motor scooters in Italy, trying to figure out the road signs in Japan." And that's how he started coming up with the plot for the second movie and why Mater plays such a big part in it. Hey John, that's great and all, but that kind of sort of doesn't explain at all how you came up with the British spies uncovering a conspiracy that Big Oil is trying to kill any race cars that use natural oil. Where did that come from? I will say, it's crazy that this movie is about 9 times more complicated than the first movie, and the second movie is about 11 minutes shorter than the first movie. The actual plot was inspired by a deleted scene in the first movie. In the first movie, Sally and McQueen went to a drive-in movie theater and watched an action spy movie like James Bond, but with cars. This scene was eventually scrapped, but they never forgot the character of Finn McMissile. And thank God for that. And this is why the sequel is so drastically different from the first one. The main inspiration for it comes from a deleted scene. But even though this scene ended up not making it into the original movie, I'm so glad they never forgot about it. Seriously, 39% is just criminal for this movie. It deserves at least double that. But I've talked the second movie to death. It's time we talk about the third movie, where Pixar had the thought, what if we made a Cars movie actually about racing? This movie has the most amount of racing out of any in the trilogy, which you would think would be a harder title to achieve, but here we are. This one is actually fairly well rated. On IMDb it has a 6.7 out of 10, and on Rotten Tomatoes it has a 69%. And that's kind of accurate. It's about a middle of the road, a little bit better than middle of the road movie. I would say it just needs to be bumped up a little bit, maybe to 76, 77%. That's what I would give it if I was in charge of ranking this movie. It puts Lightning McQueen back as the main character, which does make this a weird trilogy to watch back to back to back because the events of the second movie are just straight up not mentioned or referenced at all in the third movie. It's also much more tame than the second movie, especially with its humor and dialogue. In the second second movie, every time Mater said something, I either laughed out loud as hard as I could because it was so funny, or I wanted to kill myself because it wasn't funny at all. This third movie is a lot more mellow. And you know what rhymes with mellow? Cars 3 follows Lightning McQueen as he starts getting too old to race. He's in his 40s by the time this third movie rolls around, and in the opening scene they establish that all of his other racing friends have retired or have been replaced by younger, faster cars. And if you didn't pay attention to that opening part, don't worry, they're gonna remind you again in 5 minutes. Like, seriously, I got major deja vu from watching this movie. Every 2 minutes, someone would say a line about McQueen being too old, and it's like, I get it. Lightning McQueen is old, but can you stop saying the same thing over and over again? I swear, a lot of the time, it was just the same information. They would just copy and paste it from one scene to another. It's like, I get it. Lightning McQueen is old, but can you stop saying the same thing over and over again? I swear, a lot of the time, it was just straight up the same line. They would just copy and paste it from one character to another, saying the same thing about how Lightning McQueen is too old, and it's like, I get it, but can you please stop repeating the same information over and over again? This is a movie that would have hugely benefited from having some sort of B-plot, maybe involving Mater or Sally or anyone from the rest of the town of Radiator Springs, but no, they had one plot, and by God, they were gonna spam the crap out of it. I know I'm ragging on this movie in a video about how much I love the Cars trilogy, but I do like this movie. I just think it's one of those movies where I like the plot and the characters, but I don't really like the dialogue and some of the scenes. The best way I could describe it to you is that this movie is a lot better if somebody just describes the plot to you and then you watch a few key scenes. The stuff here is great. There's just not a lot of stuff. The idea of McQueen having to move on from competing because he's too old, and the scenes where he's talking to Doc's old mentor Smokey are great parts, but there's just not enough here. Like, there's a whole 10-minute scene where they're in a mud derby, and this scene has almost nothing to do with the rest of the plot, except for a small bit at the end that's kind of shoehorned in there. But overall, it really doesn't have anything to do. It does not matter. You could take out this scene, and almost nothing would change about this story. It goes nowhere, and it goes on for so long. Again, there's good stuff here. I just think having a B-plot would have made this movie so much better. But padding the runtime and having useless scenes would not be the one thing to make people dislike this movie. The ending is the real make or break for a lot of people. If you ask someone if they like Cars 3, a lot of the time it boils down to how they feel about the final 15 minutes. And I can understand why some people don't like the ending. I mean, Lightning McQueen didn't finish the race. But come on, the whole movie is about him being old. Did you really think he was gonna race? Some people just don't like the fact that Lightning McQueen is done racing, and honestly, I understand that. Lightning McQueen kind of gets snuffed out of his own trilogy. He's the main character of the first movie, then he gets sidelined in the second movie for Mater, then is technically the main character of the third movie again, but the whole thing is about how slow he is now and ends with him retiring. So if you like seeing Lightning McQueen race, then yeah, you have a right to be a little bit upset. But overall, I think this movie is great, and somebody needs to show Cars 3 to Aaron Rodgers. But I did notice something kind of funny while watching these movies for this video. I had seen all 3 of these movies before, but I had never watched them on back-to-back nights like I did with this viewing. And when you have a marathon of these 3 movies in the trilogy, it does feel really weird. All of these movies work very well as standalone movies, but watching them one after another, you realize how different all 3 are from each other. Some would call that a weakness. I call that a quirk. There was at least a 5 years gap between each movie. When you watch them all in a row, you feel all the creativity that was put into these. As I've rewatched all these movies and read hundreds of reviews for these 3 movies, I've realized something. Critics don't hate the Cars movies as much as they hate the idea of the franchise Cars. See, my theory is that when a lot of film critics see the Cars franchise, all they see is a franchise designed to sell car toys to children, and they go into the movies wanting to not like them. The first movie critics didn't like because they said it was too normal and too safe. The second movie critics didn't like because it was too weird and too out there of an idea. Like, pick a lane if you're going to criticize. I love these movies, and it's one of the only trilogies with a start and end point. It starts with us with Lightning McQueen in his rookie season, and it ends with us with Lightning McQueen in his last season. We've completed his storyline. And even though all 3 of these movies have flaws, they will always hold a special place in my heart. And nothing could ever make me love this franchise less. Okay, there is one thing